All right, folks, well, welcome back. Today, we're going to begin part two of The Green Mile, The Mouse on the Mile. Just a recap of what we learned in part one, The Two Dead Girls. We meet our narrator, Paul Edgecombe, who we learn is the lead guard, head bull screw, at Cold Mountain Prison on E Block, otherwise known as The Green Mile. We learn why it is called The Green Mile. We meet the only prisoner currently on E Block, which is Edward Delacroix, and the circumstances surrounding him arriving on the Green Mile. We are then introduced to John Coffey, who will be the central character of our story for the most part. And we learn the circumstances surrounding him arriving on the mile as well. We meet the other guards, Brutus Howell, Henry Tilburger, Bill Dodge, Dean, and Percy. We learn that Percy is not the most pleasant person to be around. We learn that he's pretty politically connected. We also meet the warden, Bill Morris, learn about his sick wife, circumstances surrounding that. And we meet Mr. Jingles. We learn about Mr. Jingles, who is the mouse on the mile. And we get a brief look into how he came to be a resident on E Block. And book two delves a little bit deeper into the story of Mr. Jingles, how he arrives on the Green Mile, and why he is so important. So without further ado, we will dive into chapters 1, 2, and 3 of book 2, part 2, The Mouse on the Mile. And part 2 will be read by a guest reader, someone who's very special to me, someone who is responsible for my love of reading and specifically my love of Stephen King, my dad. So enjoy. As you listen to chapters 1 through 3, as you come to the end of each chapter, make sure you pause the video to answer the questions on the quiz for that chapter. And once you finish the quiz, make sure you submit it. So enjoy The Green Mile, part 2, The Mouse on the Mile.
Stephen King, The Green Mile, Part 2, The Mouse on the Mile. The nursing home where I'm crossing my last bunch of T's and dotting my last mess of I's is called Georgia Pines. It's about 60 miles from Atlanta and about 200 light years from life as most people under the age of 80, let's say, live it. You who are reading this want to be careful that there isn't a place like it waiting on your future. It's not a cruel place. Now, for the most part, there's cable TV. The food's good, or there's damn little a man can chew. But in its way, it's as much of a killing bottle of E Block as Cold Mountain ever was. There's even a fella here who reminds me a little of Percy Whitman, who got his job on a Green Mile because he was related to the governor of the state. I doubt if this fella's related to anyone important, even though he acts that way. Brad Dolan, his name is. He's always combing his hair like Percy was, and he's always got something to read stuffed in his back pocket. With Percy, it was magazines like Argosy, or Men's Adventure. With Brad, it's little paperbacks called Gross Jokes and Sick Jokes. He's always asking people why the Frenchman crossed the road, or how many Polacks it takes to screw in a light bulb, or how many pallbearers there are at a Harlem funeral. Like Percy, Brad is a dimwit who thinks nothing's funny unless it's mean. Something Brad said the other day struck me as actually smart, but I don't give him a lot of credit for it. Even a stop clock is right twice a day, the proverb has it. You're just lucky you don't have that Alzheimer's disease, Paulie, is what he said. I hate him calling me that, Paulie, but he goes on doing it anyway. I've given up asking him to quit. There are other sayings, not quite proverbs. They apply to Brad Dolan. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink, is one. You can dress him up, but you can't take him out as another. In his thick-headedness, he is also like Percy. When he made his comment about Alzheimer's, he was mopping the floor at the solarium, where I had been going over the pages I have already written. There's a great lot of them, and I think there's apt to be a great lot more before I'm through. That Alzheimer's, do you know what it really is? No, I said, but I'm sure you're going to tell me, Brad. It's AIDS for old people, he said, and then just burst out laughing, hug, just like he does over those idiotic jokes of his. I didn't laugh, though, because what he said struck a nerve somewhere. Not that I've had Alzheimer's, although there's plenty of it on view here at the beautiful Georgia Pines. I myself just suffered standard old guy memory problems. Those problems seem to have more to do with when than what. Looking over what I've written so far, it occurs to me that I remember everything that happened back in 32. It's the order of events that sometimes get confused in my head. Yet, if I'm careful, I think I can keep even sorted out, more or less. John Coffey came to E Block in the Green Mile in October that year, condemned for the murder of the 9-year-old Dederick twins. That's my major landmark. If I keep it in view, I should do just fine. William Wild Bill Wharton came after Coffey. Devereaux came before. So did the mouse. The one Brutus Howell, brutal to his friends, called Steamboat Willie, and Devereaux ended up calling Mr. Jingles. Whatever you call him, the mouse came first, even before Dell. It was still summer when he showed up. We had 2 other prisoners on the Green Mile, the chief, Arlen Bitterbuck, and the prez, Arthur Flanders. That mouse, that goddamn mouse. Devereaux loved it, but Percy Whitmore sure didn't. Percy hated it from the first. Go over the questions of chapter 1. Now, chapter 2. The mouse came back just about 3 days after Percy had chased it down the Green Mile that first time. Dean Stanton, Bill Dodge were talking politics, which meant in those days they were talking Roosevelt and Hoover. Herbert, not J. Edgar. They were eating Ritz crackers from the box Dean had purchased from the old Toot-Toot an hour or so before Percy was standing in the office doorway, practicing quick draws with the baton he loved so much as he listened. He pulled it out of that ridiculous hand-told holster he had gotten somewhere, then twirled it, or tried to. Most times he had dropped it, if not for the rawhide loop he kept on his wrist, then reholstered it. He was off that night, but got the full report from Dean the following evening. The mouse came up the Green Mile just as it did before, hopping along, then stopping, and seeming to check the empty cells. After a bit of that, he would hop on. Undiscouraged, as it had known all along, it would be a long search, and it was up to that. The prisoner was awake this time, standing at his cell door. That guy was a piece of work. Managed to look natty even in his prison clothes. You know just by the way he looked that he wasn't made for old Sparky. And we were right. Less than a week after Percy's second run of that mouth, Prez's sentence was commuted to life, and he joined the general population. Say, he called, there's a mouse in here. What kind of joint are you guys running anyway? He was kind of laughing, but Dean said he also sounded kind of outraged, as if even a murder rap hadn't been quite enough to knock the Kiwanis out of his soul. He had been the regional head of an outfit called Mid-South Realty Associates, and had thought himself smart enough to be able to get away with pushing his half-senile father out a third-story window and collect on double indemnity. Whole life policy. On that, he had been wrong, but maybe not about much. Shut up, you lagoon, Percy said, but that was pretty much automatic. He had his eyes on the mouse. He had rehosted his baton and taken it out one of his magazines, but now he tossed the magazine on the duty desk and pulled the baton out of his holster again. He began tapping it casually against the knuckles of his left hand. Son of a bitch, Bill Dodge said. I never seen a mouse in here before. Oh, he's sort of cute, Dean said, and not afraid at all. How do you know? He was in the other night. Percy saw him too. Brutal called him Steamboat Willie. Percy kind of sneered at that, but by the time he began saying, he said nothing. He was tapping the baton faster now on the back of his hand. Watch this, Dean said. He came all the way up to the desk before. I want to see if he'll do it again. It did, skirting wide of the prayers on his way, if he didn't like the way our resident particle smelled. It checked out the 2 empty cells, even ran up to the one on the bare, unmattressed cots for a stiff, then came back to the Green Mile. And Percy standing there like the whole time, tapping and tapping, not talking for a change, wanted to make it sorry for coming back, wanted to teach it a lesson. Good thing you guys don't have to put him in Sparky, Bill said, interested in spite of himself. You'd have a hell of a time getting the clamps around that cap off. Percy said nothing still, but he was very slowly gripping the baton between his fingers, though a man would hold a good cigar. The mouth stopped where it had before, no more than 3 feet from the duty desk. Looking up at Dean like a prisoner before the bar, he glanced up at Bill for a moment, then switched his attention back to Dean. Percy had hardly seemed to notice at all. He's a brave little bastard. I got to give him that, Bill said. He raised his voice a little. Hey, hey, Steamboat Willie! The mouth flinched a little and fluttered its ears, but it didn't run, or even show any signs of wanting to. Now watch this, Dean said. Remember how Brutal had fed it some of his corned beef sandwich? I don't know if he'll do it again, but he broke off a piece of rich cracker and dropped it in front of the mouth. It just looked with its sharp black eyes at the orangery fragment for a second or two, its filament fine whiskers twitching as it sniffed. Then it reached out, took the cracker in his paws, sat up, and began to eat. Well, I'll be shuckled and boiled, Bill explained. Eats as neat as a person on a parish house Sunday night. Looked more like a nigger eating watermelon to me, Percy remarked, but neither guard paid him any mind. Neither did the chief or the prayers, for that matter. The mouse finished the cracker, but continued to sit, seemingly balanced on the talon coil of his tail, looking up at the giants in blue. Let me try, Bill said. He broke off another piece of cracker, leaned over the front of the desk, and dropped it carefully. The mouse sniffed, but it did not touch. Huh, Bill said. Must be full. No, Dean said. He knows you're a floater, that's all. Floater, am I? I like that. I'm here almost as much as Harry Tilwilliger, maybe more. Simmer down, old timer, simmer down, Dean said, grinning. But watch and see if I'm not right. He bombed another piece of cracker over the side. Sure enough, the mouse picked that one up and began to eat again, still ignoring Bill Dodge's contribution completely. Before it had done more than take a preliminary nibble or two, Percy threw his baton at it, laughing at it like a spear. The mouth was a small target and gave the devil his due. It was Wrigley's good shot and might have taken Willie's head off, clean off, if its reflexes hadn't been as sharp as shards of broken glass. It ducked, yes, just a human being would have, and dropped the chunk of cracker. The heavy hickory baton passed over his head and spine close enough so his fur ruffled. That's what Dean said anyway, and so I'll pass it on, although I'm not sure I really believe it. Then hit the green linoleum and bounced against the bars of an empty cell. The mouse didn't wait to see if it was a mistake. Apparently remembering a pressing engagement elsewhere, it turned and was off down the corridor toward the restraint room in a flash. Percy roared with frustration. He knew how close he had come and chased after it again. Bill Dodge grabbed at his arm, probably out of simple instinct, but Percy pulled it away from him. Still, Dean said, it was probably that grab which saved Steamboat Willie's life, and it was still a near thing. Percy wanted not just to kill the mouse, but to squash it. So he ran in big, comical leaps like a deer stamping down with his heavy black work shoes. The mouse barely avoided Percy's last 2 jumps, first zigging and then zagging. It went under the door with a final flick of his long pink tail, and so long, stranger, it was gone. Fuck, Percy said, and slammed that flat of his hand against the door. Then he began to sort through his keys, meaning to go inside the restraint room and continue the chase. Dean came down the corridor after, deliberately walking slow in order to get his emotions under control. Part of him wanted to laugh at Percy, he told me, but part of him wanted to grab the man, whirl him around, and pin him against the restraint room door, and wail the living daylights out of him. Most of it, of course, was just being startled. Our job on E-Block was to keep Rumpus to a minimum, and Rumpus was particularly Percy Whitmore's middle name. Working with him was sort of like trying to defuse a bomb, with someone standing behind you and every now and then deck clashing a pair of cymbals together. In a word, upsetting. Dean said he could see that upsetting all in Bitterbuck's eyes, even in the president's eyes, although that gentleman was usually as cool as a stored cucumber. And there was something else as well. In some part of his mind, Dean had already begun to accept the mouse as, well, maybe not as a friend, but as a part of life on the block that made what Percy had done and what he was trying to do not right. Not even if it was a mouse. He was trying to do it to it. And the fact that Percy never understood how come it wasn't was pretty much the perfect example of why he was all wrong for the job he thought he was doing. By the time Dean reached the end of the quarter, he had gotten himself under control again and knew how he wanted to handle the matter. The one thing Percy absolutely couldn't stand was to look foolish, as we all knew it. Of course, it's fooled again, he said, grinning a little, kidding Percy along. Percy gave him an ugly look and flicked his hair off his brow. Watch your mouth, Four Eyes. I'm Rob. Don't make it worse. So it's moving day again, is it, Dean said, not quite laughing, but laughing with his eyes. Well, when you get everything out this time, would you mind mopping the floor? Percy looked at the door, looked at his keys, thought about another long, hot, fruitless rummage in the room with soft walls, while the maid all stood around and watched him. The chief and the prez, too. I'll be damned if I understand what's so funny, he said. We don't need mice in the cell block. We got enough vermin in here already without adding mice. Whatever you say, Percy, Dean said, holding up his hands. He had a moment right there, he told me the next night, when he believed Percy might just take after him. Bill Dow strolled up and smoothed it over. I think you dropped this, he said, and handed Percy his baton. An inch lower, you would have broken a little Barcy's back. Percy's chest expanded at that. Yeah, it wasn't a bad shot, he said, carefully reseating his hand knocker in the foolish holster. He used to be a pitcher in high school, threw 2 no-hitters. Is that right now? Bill said, in a respectful tone of voice, although he winked at Dean when Percy turned away, was enough to finish diffusing the situation. Yep, Percy said, threw 1 down in Knoxville. Those city boys didn't know what hit him. Walked 2. Could have had a perfect game if the ump hadn't been such a lagoon. Dean could have left it at that, but he had seniority on Percy, and part of a senior's job is to instruct. And at that time, before Coffey, before Devereaux, he still thought Percy might be teachable. So he reached out and grasped the youngster man's wrist. You want to think about what you was doing just now, Dean said. His intention, he said later, was to sound serious, but not disapproving. Not too disapproving, anyway. Except with Percy, that didn't work. He might not learn, but he would eventually. Say, Four Eyes, I know what I was doing, trying to get that mouse. What, you blind? You also scared the cheese out of Bill, out of me, and out of them, Dean said, pointing to the direction of Bitterbuck and Flanders. So what, Percy asked, drawing himself up. They ain't in cradle school, in case you didn't notice, although you guys treat them that way half the time. Well, I don't like to be scared, Bill rumbled, and I work here, Whitmore, in case you didn't notice. I ain't one of your lagoons. Percy gave him a look that was narrow-eyed and touch uncertain. And we don't scare them any more than we have to, because they're under a lot of strain, Dean said. He was still keeping his voice low. Men that are under a lot of strain can snap, hurt themselves, hurt others, sometimes get folk like us in trouble, too. Percy's mouth twisted that. In trouble was an idea that had power over him. Making trouble was okay. Getting into it was not. Our job is talking, not yelling, Dean said. A man who is yelling at prisoners is a man who has lost control. Percy knew who had written that scripture. Me, the boss. There was no loss between Percy Whitmore and Paul Edgecombe, and this was still summer. Remember, long before real festivities started. You'll do better, Dean said, if you think of this place as an intensive care ward in a hospital. It's best to be quiet. I think of it as a bucket of piss to drown rats, said Percy said, and that's all. Now let me go. He tore free of Dean's hands, stepped between him and Bill, and stalked up the corridor and his head down. He walked a little too close to the president's side, clustered close enough so that Flanders could have reached out, grabbed him, and maybe head with him with his own prize-sized hickory baton. Had Flanders been that sort of man? He wasn't, of course, but the chief perhaps was. The chief, if given a chance, might have administered such a beating just to teach Percy a lesson. What Deed said to me on that subject, when he told me this story the following night, has struck me over ever since, because it turned out to be a kind of prophecy. Whitmore don't understand he hasn't got any power over them, Dean said. There's nothing he does that can really make things worse for them, that they can only be electrocuted once. Until he gets his head around that, he's going to be a danger to himself and to everyone else down here. Percy went into my office and slammed the door behind him. My, Bill Dodge said. And he's a swollen and badly infected testicle. You don't know the half of it, Dean said. Oh, look at the bright side, Bill said. He was always telling people to look on the bright side. It got so you wanted to punch his nose every time it came out of his mouth. You trick mouth got away, at least. Yeah, we won't see him no more, Dean said. I imagine this goddamn Percy Gizmo scared him off for good. Now that's the questions of Chapter 2. Chapter 3. That was logical but wrong. The mouse was back that very next evening. It just happened to be the first of Percy Whitmore's 2 nights off before he slid over the graveyard shift. Steamboat Willie showed up around 7 o'clock. I was there to see his reappearance. So was Dean. Harry Tilwilliger, too. Harry was on the desk. I was technically on days, but had struck around to spend an extra hour with the chief, whose time was getting close by then. Bitterbuck was stoical on the outside, in the tradition of his tribe, but I could see his fear of the end growing inside him, like a poison flower. So we talked. Could talk to them in the daytime, but it wasn't so good with the shouts and the conversation, not to mention the occasional fist fight coming from the exercise yard, the chomp, chomp, chomp of slamming machines in the plate shop, an occasional yell of a guard for someone to put down that pick or grab up that hoe or just get your ass over here, Harvey. After 4, got a little better. After 6, it got better still. 6 to 8 was the opium time. After that, you could see the long thoughts starting to steal over their minds again. In their eyes, too, you could see it, like afternoon shadows. And it was the best to shop. Still heard what you were saying, but it no longer made sense to them. Past 8, they were getting ready for the watches of the night and imagine how the caps would feel when it clamped down to the tops of their heads, and how their air would smell inside the black bag, which had been rolled down over their sweaty faces. But I got the chief at a good time. He told me about his first wife, and they had built a lodge together in Montana. Those had been the happiest days of his life, he said. The water was so pure and so cold that it felt like your mouth was cut every time you drank. Hey, Mr. Edgecombe, he said, you think if the man he'd sincerely repent for what he done wrong, he might get back the time he had was the happiest for him and live there forever? Could that be what heaven is like? I just about believed that everything I said, which was a lie. I didn't regret in the least. I had learned of matters eternal of my mother's pretty need, and what I believe is what the good book says about murderers, that there is no eternal life in them. I think they go straight to hell, where they burn in torment until God finally gives Gabriel the nod to blow that judgment trump. When he does, they'll wink out, and probably glad to go they will be. But I never gave a hint of such belief to Bitterbuck or any of them. I think in their hearts they knew it. Where's your brother? His blood cries to me from the ground. God said to Cain, and I doubt if the words are much of a surprise to that particular problem child. I bet he heard Abel's blood whining out of the earth at him with each step he took. The chief was smiling when I left, perhaps thinking about his lodge in Montana and his wife lying bare-breasted in the light of the fire. He'd be walking up warmer's fire soon. I had no doubt. I went back up the quarter and Dean told me about his set two with Percy the previous night. I think he waited around just so he could, and I listened carefully. Always listen carefully when the subject was Percy, because I agree with Dean 100%. I thought Percy was the sort of man who would cause a lot of trouble, as much for the rest of us, for himself. As Dean was finishing, old Tutu came by with his red snack wagon, which was covered with hand-lettered Bible quotes. Repent, for the Lord shall judge his people. Deuteronomy 32:36. And surely your blood or your lives will I require. Genesis 9:5. And similarly cherry uplifting sentiments. And sold us some sandwiches and pops. Dean was hunting for change in his pocket and saying that we wouldn't see Steamboat Willie anymore. That goddamn Percy Whitmore had scared him off for good. When old Toot Toot said, "What's that there then?" He looked, and here came the mouse of the hour for himself, hopping in the middle of the Green Mile. He'd come a little way, then stopped, looked around with bright little oil-dripped eyes that came on again. "Hey, Mouse," the chief said, and the mouse stopped and looked at him, whiskers twitching. I tell you, it was exactly as if the damn thing knew it had been called. "You some kind of spirit guide?" Bitterbuck tossed the mouse a little morsel of cheese from his supper. It landed right in front of the mouse, but Steamboat Willie hardly even glanced at it. Just came on his way up again, up the Green Mile, looking at empty cells. "Boss Edgemar," the president called. "Do you think that little bastard knows Whitmore isn't here?" "I do, by God." I felt about the same, but I wasn't going to say it so out loud. Harry came out into the hall, hitching up his pants the way he always did after he'd spent a refreshing few moments in the can, and stood there with his eyes wide. Toot Toot was also staring, a sullen grin going down unpleasant things to the soft and toothless lower half of his face. The mouse stopped in what was becoming his usual spot, curled his tail around his paws, and looked at us. Again, I was reminded of pictures I had seen of judges passing sentence on hapless prisoners. Yet, had there ever been a prisoner as small as and unafraid as this one? Not that it really was a prisoner, of course. It could come and go pretty much as it pleased. Yet the idea would not leave my mind, and again occurred to me that most of us would feel that small when we're approaching God's judgment seat after our lives are over. But very few of us will be able to look so unafraid. "Well, I swear," old Toot Toot said. "There he sits, big as Billy Beefridge." "You ain't seen nothing yet, Toot," Harry said. "Watch this." He reached into his breast pocket and came out with a slice of cinnamon apple wrapped in wax paper. He broke off the end and tossed it on the floor. It was dry and hard, and I thought it would bounce right back past the mouth. But he reached out with one paw, and the carelessly as a man swatting a fly to pass the time, and batted it flat. We all laughed in admiration and surprise, an outburst of sound that should have sent the mouse skittering. But it barely twitched. It picked up the piece of dried apple in its paws, gave it a couple licks, then dropped it and looked up at us as to say, "Not bad. What else do you have?" Toot Toot opened his cart, took out a sandwich, unwrapped it, and tore off a scrap of bologna. "Don't bother," Dean said. "What do you mean?" Toot Toot asked. Ain't a mouse alive passed up balloon if he could get it. You a crazy guy? But I knew Dean was right, and I could see Harry's face that he knew it too. There were floaters and there were regulars. Somehow that mouse seemed to know the difference. Nuts, but true. Old Tutu tossed the scrap of bologna down, and sure enough, the mouse wouldn't have a thing to do with it. Sniffed it once, and then backed off a piece. "I'll be goddamn son of a bitch," old Tutu said, sounding offended. I held up my gang. "Give it to me." "What's some same sandwich?" "Same one. I'll pay for it." Tutu handed it over. I lifted the type of slice of bread, tore off another sliver of meat, and dropped it over the front of the duty desk. The mouse came forward at once, picked it up in his paws, and began to eat. The bologna was gone before you could say Jack Robinson. "I'll be goddamn," Tutu cried. "Bloody hell, give me that." He snatched back the sandwich, tore off a much larger piece of meat, not a scrap this time, but a flap, and dropped it so close to the mouth that Steamboat Willie almost ended up wearing it for a hat. It grew back again. Sniff. Surely no mouse ever had hit such a jackpot during the Depression. Not in our state, at least. Then he looked up at us. "Go on and eat it," Tutu said, sounding more offended than ever. "What's wrong with you?" Dean took the sandwich, dropped a piece of meat. By then it was like some strange communion service. The mouse picked it up at once and bolted down. Then it turned and went back down the corridor to the restraint room, pausing along the way to peer into a couple of empty cells and to take a brief inventory of the third. Once again, their eye there, it was looking for someone occurred to me, and this time I dismissed the thought more slowly. "I'm not going to talk about this," Harry said. He sounded as if he was half joking, half not. "First of all, nobody'd care. Second, they wouldn't believe me if they did." "He only ate from you fellas," Tutu said. He shook his head in disbelief, then bent laboriously over, picked up what the mouse had disdained, and propped it up in his own toothless maw, where he began the job of gumming into submission. "Now, why did he do that?" "I got a better one," Harry said. "How did he know Percy was off?" "He didn't," I said. "It was just coincidence. That mouse showing up tonight." Except that got harder and harder to believe as the days went by, and the mouse showed up only when Percy was off, on another shift, or in another part of the prison. We, Harry, Dean, Bruto, and me, decided that it must know Percy's voice or his smell. We carefully avoided too much discussion about the mouse itself. That we seemed to have decided without saying a word might go a long way towards spoiling something that was special and beautiful by virtue of its strangeness and delicacy. Willie had chosen us, after all, in some way. I do not understand, even now. Maybe Harry came close when he said it would do no good to tell other people, not just because they wouldn't believe it, but because they wouldn't care. Now I'll answer the questions of Chapter 3.